The first snow of December had begun to dust the windows of Silvermere House when Lord Pemberton drew back the velvet curtain from his latest acquisition. The assembled guests, warmed by champagne and the crackling fire in the great library, leaned forward with the practiced interest of those accustomed to viewing expensive objects. What they saw was a mirror of extraordinary beauty, a Georgian masterpiece whose silver frame writhed with carved acanthus leaves and cherubic faces, crowned by the motto Veritas in Speculo, Truth in the Mirror. 16th century, Lord Pemberton announced, his voice carrying the satisfaction of a man who had outbid 3 museums for the privilege. Once belonged to the Medici court, or so Hartwell assures me. He gestured toward the thin, nervous man hovering near the fireplace. Mr. Cedric Hartwell, the antiquarian whose expertise had guided this purchase and whose commission would keep him comfortable through the winter. The mirror stood upon an ornate easel, positioned to catch both the firelight and the faces of those who approached it. In its silver depths, the reflection seemed to hold more than mere images. There was something almost alive in the way it caught the light, as if centuries of secrets had been trapped within its surface. Lady Pemberton, elegant in midnight blue silk, observed the gathering with the detached air of a woman who had long since ceased to be impressed by her husband's acquisitions. Her stepdaughter, Miss Vivian Pemberton, stood beside the piano, her youth and beauty a sharp contrast to the studied sophistication of the other guests. The girl's eyes never left the mirror, and there was something unsettling in her fixed attention. Colonel Ashford, Lord Pemberton's old friend from their army days, examined the piece with a soldier's practical eye. Handsome enough, he conceded, though I've never understood the appeal of looking at oneself so formally. His wife, a small bird-like woman with sharp eyes, murmured something about vanity being the root of all evil. Dr. Marcus Fielding, the family physician whose discretion had made him invaluable to London society, studied the mirror with professional interest. Fascinating how silver tarnishes, he observed. The oxidation creates patterns, almost like fingerprints of time itself. Near the library's tall windows stood Mr. James Whitmore, Lord Pemberton's secretary and man of business, his ledger tucked under his arm as always. He had the pale, indoor complexion of a man who spent his days with numbers rather than people, and his eyes held the calculating look of someone perpetually assessing value. Mrs. Blackwood, the housekeeper whose 30 years of service had made her privy to more family secrets than any confessor, moved quietly among the guests, ensuring glasses remained filled. Her presence was so unobtrusive that she might have been invisible, yet nothing escaped her watchful gaze. Lord Pemberton called for attention with a crystal bell. "I propose a little experiment," he announced, his eyes bright with mischief. "They say this mirror reveals not just one's appearance, but one's true nature. Shall we test the legend?" The suggestion was met with nervous laughter. One by one, the guests approached the mirror, each studying their reflection with varying degrees of comfort. Colonel Ashford saw himself as he always had, a straightforward soldier with nothing to hide. His wife glimpsed something that made her step back quickly, her hand pressed to her throat. Dr. Fielding regarded his reflection with clinical detachment, as if examining a patient. When Miss Vivian's turn came, she approached the mirror with reluctant steps. In its depths, her face appeared pale and strained, and for a moment she seemed to see something that made her gasp softly. She turned away quickly, her cheeks flushed. Lord Pemberton himself was the last to look. He stood before the glass for a long moment, his expression growing thoughtful, then troubled. "Curious," he murmured. "For a moment I could have sworn." He shook his head and stepped back. The evening progressed with dinner and cards, but the mirror seemed to cast a shadow over the festivities. Conversations grew stilted, glances became furtive, and more than once someone was caught staring at the covered glass, as if it might reveal its secrets without invitation. It was near midnight when Lord Pemberton excused himself. "I must write a letter," he announced. something that cannot wait until morning. He retired to his private study, a small room adjacent to the library, where he conducted his most confidential business. The remaining guests gradually dispersed to their rooms, leaving only the dying fire and the shrouded mirror as witnesses to the night's strange undercurrents. Mrs. Blackwood performed her final duties, checking locks and extinguishing lamps, before retiring to her quarters in the servants' wing. The discovery came at dawn. Mrs. Blackwood, arriving early to prepare the morning tea, found the study door ajar. Inside, Lord Pemberton sat slumped over his writing desk, a half-finished letter before him, and an ornate silver letter-opener protruding from between his shoulder blades. The weapon bore the same decorative motifs as the mirror's frame, a matching piece from the same historical set. But it was not the manner of death that would puzzle the investigators. It was the letter itself, written in Lord Pemberton's careful hand. "The mirror has shown me a truth I cannot live with. If you are reading this, then justice has found me at last. Look to the silver for your answers." The sentence ended there, the pen fallen from lifeless fingers. And in the library beyond, the great mirror stood silent and watchful, its silver surface holding secrets that only the most discerning eye might hope to uncover. Mrs. Blackwood's scream brought the household running, and within the hour the local constabulary had arrived. Inspector Morrison, a competent man overwhelmed by the social complexities of such a case, quickly found himself in need of assistance. It was Colonel Ashford who suggested, with the authority of a man accustomed to command, that they might benefit from consulting a certain Belgian gentleman whose reputation for solving impossible cases had reached even their quiet corner of the countryside. And so, as the December snow continued to fall and the great mirror reflected the chaos of a house in turmoil, a telegram was dispatched to London requesting the immediate presence of Monsieur Hercule Poirot. The pale December morning brought Inspector Morrison to Silvermere House with the reluctant authority of a man thrust beyond his usual domain of poaching disputes and village disturbances. He found himself confronting not merely a corpse, but a locked room that seemed to mock the very principles of detection. The study door had been secured from within, the key discovered in Lord Pemberton's own pocket, while the windows remained latched against the winter cold. Yet the silver letter-opener protruding from between the victim's shoulder blades spoke eloquently of murder, its ornate handle matching the decorative motifs of the mysterious mirror that had so captivated the previous evening's gathering. The assembled household presented a tableau of shock and barely concealed anxiety as Morrison gathered them in the morning room. Lady Pemberton maintained her composure with aristocratic precision, her mourning dress somehow suggesting preparation rather than grief. When questioned about the evening's events, she confirmed that her husband had retired to his study at approximately 11:45, claiming urgent correspondence demanded his attention. Her voice carried the cool detachment of a woman long accustomed to her husband's theatrical gestures, though her eyes occasionally flickered toward the library, where the shrouded mirror waited like a silent witness. Miss Vivian Pemberton presented a stark contrast to her stepmother's controlled demeanor, her youth and beauty marred by genuine distress. She admitted to retiring early with a headache, but confessed to hearing footsteps in the corridor near midnight. The girl's nervous glances toward the covered mirror suggested a deeper unease than mere grief, and when pressed about her relationship with her stepfather, she revealed recent tensions over her secret engagement to a penniless artist, whom Lord Pemberton had forbidden her to see. The inheritance that would now be hers carried the bitter weight of freedom purchased with blood. Colonel Ashford, his military bearing intact despite the circumstances, provided a straightforward account of smoking and conversation with Dr. Fielding until 12:30. His wife, sharp-eyed and nervous, corroborated his story while adding her own observation about retiring at 11 and sleeping fitfully due to her delicate nerves. The colonel's friendship with the deceased, stretched back to their army days, though financial difficulties had recently strained their relationships, with Lord Pemberton serving as both creditor and confidant in matters the Colonel preferred not to discuss. Dr. Fielding spoke with professional detachment about the evening's events, confirming his late conversation with the Colonel while noting that he had taken a sleeping draught upon retiring. His long association with the family as both physician and friend had made him privy to intimate secrets, and his careful responses suggested knowledge he felt bound by medical discretion to protect. The doctor's examination of the wound confirmed murder while ruling out any possibility of self-infliction, the angle and depth requiring an attacker positioned behind and slightly to the right of the victim. Mr. Hartwell, the antiquarian whose expertise had brought the mirror to Silvermere House, displayed obvious agitation as he recounted his early retirement at 11:15. His nervous habit of adjusting his spectacles and smoothing his thinning hair intensified when discussion turned to the mirror's provenance, suggesting anxiety beyond mere professional embarrassment. The connection between his prized acquisition and the night's tragedy threatened not only his reputation, but his carefully constructed career built upon the authentication of valuable antiquities. James Whitmore, the secretary whose pale complexion spoke of countless hours spent with ledgers rather than sunlight, produced his pocket diary with mechanical precision. He claimed to have worked until 1 o'clock reconciling accounts, troubled by a discrepancy of £47 that demanded resolution. His intimate knowledge of Lord Pemberton's financial affairs, including several questionable investments and lending arrangements, positioned him uniquely to benefit from his employer's sudden demise or to suffer from the exposure of irregularities he had helped conceal. Mrs. Blackwood, whose 30 years of faithful service had made her privy to every family secret, moved through her duties with the mechanical precision of shock. She confirmed her nightly routine of checking locks at 11:30, noting Lord Pemberton's study lamp still burning at that time. Her discovery of the body at dawn had been accompanied by the terrible realization that the tea tray she carried would never again be needed by the master she had served with such devotion. The physical evidence offered tantalizing clues wrapped in impossibility. The unfinished letter, with its cryptic reference to truth revealed by the mirror and justice finally arrived, suggested secrets that extended far beyond the previous evening's entertainment. The murder weapon, wiped clean of fingerprints save those of the victim, bore the same decorative motifs as the mirror's frame, linking the crime inexorably to the mysterious acquisition that had dominated the evening's gathering. As the investigation stalled against the locked room's defiance of conventional explanation, Colonel Ashford took decisive action. His telegram to London, dispatched with military efficiency, requested the immediate assistance of a certain Belgian gentleman whose reputation for solving impossible cases had reached even their remote corner of the countryside. The reply came swiftly, confirming that Monsieur Hercule Poirot would arrive on the afternoon train, bringing with him the promise of resolution through methods that transcended ordinary police work. The household settled into an uneasy afternoon of waiting, trapped by both the continuing snowfall and police requirement within the walls of Silvermere House. Conversations grew hushed and speculative, with each person studying the others for signs of guilt or hidden knowledge. The great mirror remained in the library, its shrouded form dominating the room like a silent accusation, while outside the December snow continued to fall, sealing the estate from the world and ensuring that justice, when it came, would find its quarry still within these walls. The afternoon train from London released its passengers into the swirling December snow with mechanical indifference, but among those who emerged onto the platform of Little Wickham Station, one figure commanded immediate attention through sheer force of precision. Monsieur Hercule Poirot stepped delicately from the first-class carriage, his patent leather shoes finding secure purchase on the icy platform with the careful deliberation of a man who left nothing to chance. His immaculate appearance seemed to defy the harsh weather. From his perfectly waxed mustache to his overcoat of military precision, every detail speaking of a mind that imposed order upon chaos through methodical observation and unwavering attention to the smallest particulars. Colonel Ashford waited with the estate's motor car, his military bearing recognizing in Poirot a fellow professional despite their vastly different spheres of expertise. The drive to Silvermere House proceeded with Poirot's occasional precise inquiries about the household's composition, his questions revealing an immediate grasp of social dynamics that impressed the colonel. Inspector Morrison, who joined them at the house, greeted the Belgian detective with obvious relief, his local authority clearly strained by investigating a crime that seemed to mock conventional detection methods. The great house loomed through the falling snow like something from a Gothic romance, its mullioned windows glowing warmly against the gathering dusk. Poirot paused at the threshold, his green eyes taking in every detail of the entrance hall with the methodical attention of a man who understood that truth often lay hidden in the most trivial particulars. Mrs. Blackwood received him with the deference due to his reputation, though her red-rimmed eyes spoke eloquently of grief that professional duty could not entirely suppress. The study revealed its secrets gradually to Poirot's practiced examination. He stood for several minutes in the doorway, his egg-shaped head tilted slightly as he absorbed the scene with clinical detachment. The corpse had been removed, but the room still held the heavy scent of cigars and something else, something aromatic and foreign that lingered near the cold fireplace. He knelt where the body had fallen, noting the angle suggested by the carpet's impression and the dark stain that marked Lord Pemberton's final moments. The silver letter opener, now secured as evidence, drew his particular attention for its ornate craftsmanship and its connection to the mysterious mirror that had dominated the previous evening's gathering. The unfinished letter commanded extended study, its cryptic references to truth revealed by mirrors and justice finally arrived, suggesting secrets that extended far beyond the locked room's immediate puzzle. Poirot examined the handwriting with his magnifying glass, noting the firm strokes of the opening lines, the slight hesitation at certain words, and the abrupt abandonment that spoke of sudden interruption. The pen lay to the right of the blotter, consistent with Lord Pemberton's known preference, yet something in the arrangement troubled the detective's sense of order. He spent considerable time examining the study's physical constraints, testing the door's lock mechanism with delicate fingers and running his gloved hand along the windowsill to confirm the undisturbed dust. The key's discovery in the deceased's pocket presented the classic locked room scenario, yet Poirot's experience had taught him that impossibility often masked the simplest solutions. His attention turned to the fireplace, where among the expected cigar ash he detected a finer, lighter residue with the distinctive sweetness of Turkish tobacco, not fresh but recent enough to suggest significance. In the library, the great mirror stood shrouded like a silent witness to the night's tragedy. Poirot approached it with reverent care, drawing back the velvet covering to reveal the gleaming silver surface and its ornate frame writhing with carved figures that seemed almost alive in the flickering firelight. He did not immediately examine his own reflection, but studied the glass itself, noting a hairline flaw near one cherub's wing and the way the mirror's position commanded views of multiple entrances and the strategic arrangement of furniture. "Veritas in speculo," he read aloud, his accent lending gravity to the Latin motto. Truth in the mirror, a grand claim for an object, n'est-ce pas, Inspector? And yet perhaps a prophetic one. He stepped back, allowing his gaze to encompass the room's geography, the slight displacement of a rug, the almost imperceptible scratch on a polished table, details that would escape less discerning observation. The household members moved through their daily routines with the strained courtesy of people thrust together by tragedy and suspicion, each acutely aware of Poirot's presence and his reputation for penetrating human nature. He observed them with the patience of a naturalist studying specimens, noting Lady Pemberton's composed sorrow, Miss Vivian's anxious glances toward the library, Colonel Ashford's military stoicism, and Dr. Fielding's professional reserve. Each carried themselves with the consciousness that their secrets might soon be exposed under the detective's methodical scrutiny. "The psychology, Inspector," Poirot finally remarked, adjusting an imaginary speck of dust from his sleeve. "That is where the truth resides. The physical evidence. It provides the framework, yes, but the hearts of men and women, their desires, their fears, their capacity for deception, these form the true landscape of crime." He paused, his bright eyes reflecting the firelight as they had absorbed every detail of the mysterious mirror. "Now, we must speak with each person who was present last evening. Not as suspects, you understand, but as witnesses to human nature itself." As evening approached, Poirot requested that dinner be served in the library, with the mirror remaining uncovered. The household gathered with reluctant fascination, each wondering what the famous detective had already deduced from his initial observations, unaware that their reactions to his presence were themselves becoming part of his methodical investigation into the truth that lay hidden behind Silvermere House's facade of respectability. The library at Silvermere House assumed the quality of a stage as evening settled over the snow-covered estate, with Poirot positioning himself strategically where he could observe both his subjects and their reflections in the great mirror. The firelight danced across the silver surface, creating a secondary world that seemed to reveal truths the conscious mind might conceal, and it was to this doubled reality that the Belgian detective directed his attention as he began his methodical examination of human nature. He had requested that dinner be served in this room, understanding that people reveal themselves most completely when attempting to maintain social normalcy under extraordinary circumstances, their gestures and expressions betraying the careful control their words maintained. Lady Pemberton presided with aristocratic composure, her reflection in the mirror as perfectly controlled as her physical presence. Yet Poirot's trained eye detected the subtle tension in her shoulders and the way her fingers never quite relaxed around her wine-glass. When questioned about her marriage, she offered what Poirot recognized as society's preferred form of truth, accurate yet incomplete, describing a partnership of convenience rather than passion. She confirmed her husband's theatrical nature and his recent fascination with the mirror, though her careful avoidance of direct commentary on the object's alleged powers suggested deeper knowledge than she chose to reveal. Her retirement at 11:30, she insisted, had been followed by her customary sleeping draught and undisturbed rest, though the slight tremor in her voice when mentioning the draught hinted at a dependence that extended beyond mere sleep aid. Miss Vivian presented a stark contrast to her stepmother's controlled performance, her youth making concealment impossible despite her obvious attempts at composure. The girl's nervous energy manifested in constant fidgeting as she reluctantly revealed her secret engagement to Thomas Hartley, a struggling artist whose poverty had earned Lord Pemberton's fierce opposition and threats of disinheritance. Her stepfather's discovery of their clandestine correspondence had led to increasingly bitter confrontations, with Lord Pemberton threatening to cut her off entirely if she pursued the relationship. When Poirot gently inquired about her reaction to the mirror, she shuddered visibly, confessing that her reflection had seemed somehow changed, aged and marked by shadows that had frightened her inexplicably, as if the glass had shown her a future she feared to contemplate. Colonel Ashford maintained his military bearing throughout questioning, though Poirot's subtle probes revealed financial difficulties that Lord Pemberton's friendship had temporarily alleviated through loans and investment opportunities that had recently soured. The Colonel's straightforward nature made deception difficult, and his discomfort became evident when discussing his late-night conversation with Dr. Fielding, particularly regarding certain confidential matters that had troubled both men. His wife, questioned separately, displayed the sharp observational skills of a woman accustomed to social surveillance, noting that several guests had seemed unusually agitated after viewing their reflections, though she attributed this to the mirror's undeniably unsettling presence rather than any supernatural influence. Dr. Fielding proved the most challenging subject, his professional discretion creating barriers that Poirot approached with diplomatic skill. The physician's long association with the family had made him privy to intimate secrets, including Lady Pemberton's increasing dependence on sleeping draughts and Lord Pemberton's recent complaints of persistent headaches and disturbing dreams. When pressed about his medical observations, Dr. Fielding reluctantly revealed concerns about several household members' mental states, particularly noting Miss Vivian's nervous condition and what he diplomatically termed Lord Pemberton's increasing eccentricity in recent months. His admission to smoking Virginia tobacco, contrasted with Poirot's detection of Turkish residue in the study, created an interesting discrepancy that the detective filed away for future consideration. Mr. Hartwell's interrogation revealed layers of professional anxiety beneath his scholarly exterior, his nervous habit of adjusting his spectacles intensifying under scrutiny. The antiquarian's expertise had authenticated the mirror's provenance, though he admitted certain irregularities in the documentation that had troubled his conscience and strained his relationship with Lord Pemberton. His knowledge of the mirror's allegedly cursed reputation among collectors had clearly weighed on his mind, and his obvious relief at having left the library early suggested a man fleeing from consequences he had helped set in motion through his professional activities. James Whitmore's questioning uncovered the complex financial web surrounding Lord Pemberton's recent activities, including questionable investments and lending arrangements that had placed the estate in precarious circumstances. The secretary's discovery of the £47 discrepancy had led to uncomfortable questions about transactions Lord Pemberton had conducted privately, suggesting financial irregularities that extended beyond simple accounting errors. His intimate knowledge of his employer's affairs revealed mounting debts disguised by creative bookkeeping and growing pressure from creditors demanding immediate payment, creating a motive structure that encompassed both personal gain and professional survival. Mrs. Blackwood's testimony carried the weight of 30 years' faithful service, her grief genuine yet informed by intimate knowledge of family secrets her position had made inevitable. She confirmed, observing Lord Pemberton studying his reflection for an unusually long time on the fatal evening, noting that he had seemed disturbed by what he saw and had muttered something about truth before shaking his head in apparent distress. Her keen observation had also detected subtle changes in household dynamics over recent weeks, including whispered conversations that ceased upon her approach and correspondence bearing unfamiliar seals. Throughout these conversations, Poirot maintained his characteristic attention to psychological detail, noting how each person's reflection in the great mirror seemed to capture nuances of expression that direct observation might miss. The silver surface revealed fleeting moments of fear, guilt, and calculation that provided insight into the complex web of relationships and motivations that had culminated in Lord Pemberton's death, suggesting that the mirror's alleged power to reveal truth contained more substance than mere superstition could explain. The morning light filtering through Silvermere House's frost-covered windows brought with it Inspector Morrison's unmistakable air of triumph, his satisfaction evident as he approached Poirot in the library, where the great mirror reflected their conversation with silent observation. The inspector's investigation had yielded what he considered irrefutable evidence against Mr. Cedric Hartwell, the nervous antiquarian whose expertise had brought the cursed mirror into Lord Pemberton's possession and whose financial desperation had apparently driven him to murder. Morrison's case rested upon a foundation of compelling physical evidence that seemed to answer every question the locked room mystery had posed, beginning with the discovery of a telegram intercepted at the village post office after Lord Pemberton's death, sent from a reputable Florentine dealer whose message carried devastating implications for Hartwell's professional reputation and financial survival. The telegram's contents struck at the heart of Hartwell's credibility, stating with businesslike precision that documentation supplied regarding the mirror's provenance appeared irregular, and that grave embarrassment was unavoidable for all parties involved in the transaction. This revelation, combined with Lord Pemberton's recent discovery of the deception, provided clear motive for murder, as exposure would have destroyed Hartwell's carefully constructed career and left him facing both professional ruin and potential legal consequences for fraud. Morrison had uncovered additional evidence of Hartwell's mounting debts, including overdue payments to London creditors and desperate correspondence seeking extensions that painted a picture of a man driven to extremity by financial pressure and the threat of immediate exposure. The physical evidence supporting Morrison's theory proved even more damning than the financial motive, particularly the discovery during a thorough search of Hartwell's modest lodgings of an intricately carved silver key hidden beneath loose floorboards, with obvious signs of recent disturbance. When tested against the mirror's elaborate frame, this key perfectly fitted a previously unknown compartment concealed within the ornate carvings, a secret space that Lord Pemberton had hinted at during the fatal evening's gathering but had not revealed to his guests. The inspector theorized that Hartwell had used this key either to retrieve incriminating documents or to plant evidence that would support his fraudulent claims, making Lord Pemberton's silence essential to his survival. Additional evidence included the analysis of ash residue from the study's fireplace, which revealed traces of Turkish tobacco matching a distinctive brand favored by patrons of certain exclusive London clubs, establishments where Hartwell was known to conduct business with wealthy collectors seeking rare acquisitions. A matchbook bearing the name of such an establishment, found partially concealed beneath papers on Lord Pemberton's desk, carried penciled notations in Hartwell's recognizable handwriting, detailing prices and consignment arrangements that suggested ongoing deceptive practices extending far beyond the mirror transaction. The household's reaction to Morrison's revelation reflected collective relief at having the mystery resolved and suspicion removed from their own activities, though each person's response revealed the complex emotions of individuals who had harbored their own secrets throughout the investigation. Lady Pemberton maintained her aristocratic composure while displaying subtle signs of satisfaction that her stepdaughter's inheritance would remain secure, while Miss Vivian herself seemed genuinely shocked by the accusations against the mild-mannered antiquarian who had seemed so harmless during their brief interactions. Colonel Ashford expressed military indignation at scholarly duplicity, his straightforward nature finding particular offense in intellectual dishonesty, while Dr. Fielding observed with professional interest the psychological pressures that could drive a seemingly respectable man to violence. However, Poirot's response to this apparently conclusive solution revealed fundamental disagreement with both Morrison's methodology and his conclusions, the Belgian detective's green eyes studying the assembled evidence with the skeptical attention of a man who had learned to distrust convenient answers. His gentle questioning of the inspector's assumptions began with psychological analysis of Hartwell's character, noting that the antiquarian's nervous disposition and scholarly temperament made him an unlikely candidate for the calculated violence required to commit such a crime. The detective observed that men driven by financial desperation typically chose flight or fraud over murder, and that Hartwell's obvious terror during questioning suggested guilt over professional misconduct rather than consciousness of homicide. More significantly, Poirot recognized that Morrison's solution failed to address the deeper mysteries surrounding the case, particularly Lord Pemberton's cryptic final letter with its references to truth revealed by the mirror and justice finally arrived, phrases that suggested personal reckoning rather than fear of financial exposure. The detective's methodical examination of the crime scene had revealed subtleties that the inspector's straightforward approach had overlooked, including the intimate nature of the attack and the symbolic significance of using the matching letter opener as the murder weapon, details that spoke of personal betrayal rather than desperate expedience. As Poirot diplomatically but firmly rejected Morrison's theory, explaining that the evidence's very neatness aroused his suspicions and that the psychological profile of the crime demanded a different type of perpetrator entirely, the atmosphere in the library grew charged with renewed tension. Each person present realized that their secrets remained vulnerable to exposure, and that the investigation would continue despite the apparent resolution, while the great mirror reflected their collective anxiety with silver accuracy, its surface seeming to mock their hopes for quick answers while promising that truth, however uncomfortable, would eventually emerge through the patient application of the detective's famous little gray cells to the complex web of human nature and hidden motives that surrounded Lord Pemberton's mysterious death. The evening shadows lengthened across Silvermere House as Poirot orchestrated what he privately termed his psychological symphony, positioning himself in the library where the great mirror served as both witness and accomplice to his methodical exploration of human nature under pressure. He had requested that the household gather for what he diplomatically described as a collaborative review of the evening's tragic events, though his true purpose lay in observing how each person responded when confronted with carefully chosen triggers, designed to penetrate the protective facades that guilt invariably constructs around itself. The Belgian detective understood that murderers, unlike common criminals, possessed the intelligence to maintain composure under direct questioning, but psychological pressure applied with surgical precision could force revealing reactions that conscious control could not entirely suppress. His preparation had been meticulous, arranging 4 objects on the polished table before the mirror with the deliberate care of a chess master positioning pieces for a decisive gambit. Lady Pemberton's amber sleeping draught bottle, retrieved from her dressing table with Mrs. Blackwood's discreet assistance, caught the firelight with ominous beauty, while the ledger page bearing Whitmore's notation of the mysterious 47-pound discrepancy lay beside it like an accusation written in red ink. The silver key discovered in Hartwell's lodgings rested wrapped in tissue paper, its ornate craftsmanship matching the mirror's frame with uncomfortable precision, while a cigarette case bearing traces of Turkish tobacco completed the arrangement, each item representing a different path toward motive and opportunity that the investigation had uncovered. Poirot began with casual conversation, allowing the assembled household to settle into apparent normalcy, while his observant eyes monitored both their direct reactions and the revealing reflections captured in the silver surface that seemed to hold truth more clearly than conscious expression could convey. He spoke of mirrors and their symbolic significance throughout history, noting how ancient civilizations had believed that reflective surfaces could reveal the soul's true nature, stripped of the deceptions that social interaction demanded. His gentle discourse on vanity and self-knowledge created an atmosphere of philosophical contemplation that gradually shifted toward more pointed observations about the relationship between appearance and reality, between public persona and private truth. Lady Pemberton maintained her aristocratic composure with practiced skill, yet Poirot's trained eye detected the subtle tension in her shoulders whenever his discourse touched upon dependency and the desperate measures that withdrawal from necessary medications could inspire. When he casually mentioned that sleeping draughts, while medically useful, could create both physical tolerance and emotional desperation that might drive seemingly rational people to extreme actions, her reflection in the mirror revealed a barely perceptible tightening around her eyes that suggested uncomfortable recognition. Her frequent glances toward Dr. Fielding during these moments confirmed Poirot's suspicions about their relationship extending far beyond conventional medical care, while her careful avoidance of the amber bottle on the table spoke eloquently of guilty knowledge she preferred not to acknowledge. Miss Vivian's youth made concealment impossible when Poirot's conversation turned to the tragic consequences of forbidden love and the length to which desperate hearts might go to secure happiness threatened by financial ruin. Her nervous fidgeting intensified as he recounted historical cases where inheritance disputes had led to violence, particularly when young people faced the choice between love and security, between following their hearts and preserving their futures. The girl's reflection revealed genuine distress that went beyond mere grief for her stepfather, suggesting knowledge of events or conversations that weighed heavily upon her conscience, while her protective glances toward Lady Pemberton indicated loyalty that might extend to complicity in actions she could not entirely condone. Colonel Ashford's military bearing proved less effective against Poirot's subtle psychological assault, particularly when the detective's discourse touched upon honor and the terrible compromises that financial desperation could force upon even the most principled individuals. The colonel's straightforward nature made deception difficult when confronted with philosophical discussions about gambling debts and the gradual erosion of self-respect that accompanied dependence upon the charity of friends. His obvious discomfort manifesting in increasingly rigid posture and the slight flush that rose to his neck whenever Poirot's observations struck too close to uncomfortable truths about his recent circumstances and the increasingly burdensome conditions attached to Lord Pemberton's financial assistance. Dr. Fielding's professional composure wavered subtly under questioning disguised as academic interest in medical ethics and the complex relationships that could develop between physicians and their patients, particularly when treatment extended over long periods and involved conditions that required intimate knowledge of personal habits and private fears. Poirot's casual observations about the trust that patients placed in their doctors and the terrible betrayal that violation of that trust represented brought visible perspiration to the physician's forehead despite the room's winter chill, while his careful avoidance of the cigarette case suggested awareness that his smoking preferences had become part of the investigation's complex web of evidence and suspicion. The evening's psychological pressure reached its crescendo when Poirot announced his intention to place a sealed document in the mirror's hidden compartment, a paper that would name his primary suspect based upon the psychological observations he had conducted throughout the investigation. His demonstration of the secret mechanism, using the silver key to reveal the concealed space within the ornate frame, created visible tension among the assembled household as each person realized that their carefully guarded secrets might soon be exposed to devastating scrutiny. The detective's promise to check the compartment at midnight, combined with his observation that guilty consciences rarely allowed peaceful sleep when truth threatened exposure, established the psychological trap that would force the murderer to reveal themselves through actions that conscious control could no longer govern, while the great mirror reflected their collective anxiety with silver accuracy, its surface seeming to promise that justice, however long delayed, would ultimately emerge through the patient application of methodical observation to the complex patterns of human behavior under the pressure of approaching discovery. The midnight hour approached Silvermere House with the weight of accumulated secrets, each tick of the grandfather clock in the entrance hall marking another moment closer to the revelation that Poirot had orchestrated through his careful psychological manipulation of the household's collective guilt and fear. The Belgian detective maintained his vigil in the darkened library, positioned strategically behind the heavy velvet curtains where he could observe both the great mirror and the doorway through which he expected the killer to emerge, driven by the desperate need to retrieve or destroy the document that threatened their carefully constructed facade of innocence. The house itself seemed to hold its breath in anticipation, the winter wind outside providing a mournful accompaniment to the drama unfolding within these walls where two murders had already stained the reputation of respectability that Lord Pemberton had spent decades cultivating. Inspector Morrison dozed fitfully in an armchair near the fireplace, his earlier confidence in Hartwell's guilt now replaced by the uncomfortable awareness that his investigation had failed to prevent a second tragedy that everyone sensed was approaching, with the inevitability of a Greek chorus announcing doom. At 20 minutes past 11, the soft click of the library door announced the arrival of the figure Poirot had been expecting, though the identity remained concealed by shadows and careful movement that spoke of intimate familiarity with the room's geography. The intruder approached the mirror with purposeful steps, their silhouette barely visible against the dying firelight as they reached toward the ornate frame where Poirot's sealed document waited in its secret compartment, the key turning with practiced ease that suggested previous knowledge of the mechanism's operation. The discovery that the envelope contained only blank paper triggered a reaction of frustrated rage that shattered the intruders' careful composure, their sharp intake of breath audible in the library's oppressive silence as they realized they had been manipulated by the detective's superior understanding of human psychology. In that moment of vulnerability, footsteps echoed in the corridor outside, and the sound of approaching discovery transformed calculation into panic as Mr. Cedric Hartwell appeared in the doorway, drawn by curiosity or perhaps summoned by a forged note that had promised answers to questions that had tormented his scholarly conscience. The confrontation that followed was brief but violent, with Hartwell's scholarly frame proving no match for the desperate strength of a killer whose carefully constructed alibi was crumbling under the pressure of Poirot's methodical investigation. The antiquarian's shocked recognition of his attacker's identity was cut short by a brutal shove that sent him stumbling backward toward the great mirror, his thin hands grasping futilely for support as his head struck the silvered surface with a sound like breaking crystal that would haunt the survivor's dreams for years to come. The mirror's destruction seemed to release all the accumulated tension of the investigation, its fractured surface exploding into 1,000 glittering fragments that scattered across the Persian carpet like frozen tears, each shard reflecting the firelight in accusatory flashes that illuminated the scene of violence with terrible clarity. Hartwell's lifeless form lay crumpled among the debris, his spectacles shattered and his scholarly face bearing an expression of terminal surprise that suggested he had understood too late the true nature of the danger he had stumbled into through his professional expertise. Miss Vivian's scream, piercing the night's oppressive silence, brought the household running with the stumbling urgency of people awakened from nightmares, only to discover that reality had become more terrible than their sleeping fears. The young woman stood frozen in the doorway, her face white with shock as she stared at the destruction that had transformed the elegant library into a scene from a Gothic horror. While behind her, the other members of the household crowded together with the instinctive need for mutual protection that tragedy invariably inspires. Lady Pemberton's aristocratic composure finally cracked under the strain of witnessing a second violent death in her home, her carefully maintained facade crumbling as she demanded immediate police protection, while simultaneously insisting that the investigation be concluded before any more blood could stain the reputation she had spent decades cultivating. Colonel Ashford's military training asserted itself as he took charge of securing the scene, though his obvious agitation revealed that even his battlefield experience had not prepared him for the psychological warfare being conducted within these supposedly civilized walls. Dr. Fielding's professional examination confirmed what everyone already knew, that Hartwell had died instantly from the impact with the mirror, his skull fractured by the force of collision with the unyielding silver surface that had promised to reveal truth but had instead become an instrument of death. The physician's hands trembled slightly as he performed his duties, the clinical detachment that usually protected him from emotional involvement proving inadequate against the accumulating horror of multiple murders in a household he had served faithfully for years. As Poirot emerged from his concealment, his usually immaculate appearance slightly disheveled by the evening's dramatic events, he surveyed the wreckage with the methodical attention that had made him famous throughout Europe for solving impossible cases through the application of psychology rather than conventional detection methods. The shattered mirror lay like a broken promise among the scattered papers and overturned furniture, its destruction symbolizing the end of illusions and the beginning of truth's painful emergence from the lies that had concealed it for too long. The detective's examination of the scene revealed evidence that would prove crucial to understanding both murders, including fragments of a document that had been hidden deeper within the mirror's secret compartment, papers bearing seals and signatures that suggested connections extending far beyond the immediate household and into the shadowy worlds of art, forgery, and financial fraud that had provided the motive for Lord Pemberton's murder, and now Hartwell's elimination as an inconvenient witness to crimes that demanded absolute silence for their success. The dawn light filtering through Silvermere House's frost-covered windows found Poirot amidst the wreckage of the great mirror, his methodical examination proceeding with the patience of a scholar deciphering ancient texts, each fragment of silvered glass potentially holding secrets that conventional investigation had failed to uncover. The Belgian detective moved with characteristic precision through the scattered debris, his trained eye detecting what others had missed in the chaos of Hartwell's violent death, while Inspector Morrison stood nearby with the chastened air of a man whose certainty had been shattered as completely as the mirror itself. Among the glittering shards, Poirot's careful search revealed a small leather portfolio that had been concealed within the mirror's deepest recesses, its contents protected by oiled silk wrapping that spoke of desperate secrecy and careful preservation. The portfolio contained correspondence stretching back 18 months, revealing not merely Hartwell's authentication fraud, but a sophisticated network involving European dealers and collectors who had used Lord Pemberton's prestigious reputation as cover for replacing genuine antiquities with masterful forgeries, while selling the originals through discreet private channels. More significantly, the detective discovered a letter bearing yesterday's date, written in Lord Pemberton's distinctive hand but never sent, revealing his growing awareness that his collection had become the centerpiece of an international deception. The letter detailed his intention to expose the entire scheme regardless of personal cost, explaining his cryptic final message about truth and justice as referring not to supernatural revelation, but to his determination to restore his honor through confession and cooperation with authorities who were already investigating art fraud across Europe. The physical evidence proved equally illuminating, particularly a sliver of pale blue sealing wax caught within the mirror's ornate frame, and matching residue discovered in the study's keyhole, revealing how the locked room mystery had been achieved through a duplicate key created using wax impressions. This patient, methodical approach to overcoming the study's security demonstrated planning that extended far beyond desperate improvisation, suggesting a mind capable of long-term calculation and sophisticated deception. Poirot's examination of the mirror's construction revealed subtle modifications to its silvered backing, areas where the original Georgian craftsmanship had been supplemented with carefully positioned elements that could create disturbing optical effects under specific lighting conditions. These alterations explained the mirror's unsettling ability to show reflections that seemed somehow altered or threatening, preying upon viewers' hidden anxieties and guilty consciences through psychological manipulation rather than supernatural means. The detective's analysis of residue from the study's fireplace confirmed his suspicions about the Turkish tobacco that had troubled him from the beginning, its distinctive aroma and exclusive provenance pointing towards someone whose habits differed markedly from the Virginia tobacco claimed by other household members. This seemingly minor detail provided crucial evidence linking the perpetrator to both crime scenes through their unconscious behavioral patterns that careful planning could not entirely eliminate. As the household gathered for breakfast with the strained courtesy of people trapped together by tragedy and suspicion, Poirot observed their reactions to the mirror's destruction with professional interest. Lady Pemberton's relief at the object's elimination seemed disproportionate to mere aesthetic concerns, while Miss Vivian's continued agitation suggested knowledge that extended beyond grief for her stepfather's death. Dr. Fielding's medical composure showed subtle cracks when discussion turned to the psychological effects of optical illusions, and Colonel Ashford's military straightforwardness made concealment of his financial anxieties increasingly difficult. The secretary, James Whitmore, maintained his pale efficiency while betraying nervous awareness that his intimate knowledge of Lord Pemberton's affairs had made him invaluable to criminal enterprises requiring sophisticated understanding of authentication procedures and international finance. His careful responses to Poirot's seemingly casual inquiries revealed familiarity with exclusive establishments whose clientele valued discretion over legal provenance, creating opportunities for profitable deception that had ultimately demanded murder to preserve. Most tellingly, the evidence revealed that Hartwell's death had been improvised rather than planned. The killer's panic at discovering Poirot's psychological trap, leading to violence that exposed their true nature and destroyed the careful facade they had maintained throughout the investigation. The antiquarian's elimination had been necessary to prevent testimony about the forgery network, but its clumsy execution compared to Lord Pemberton's calculated murder revealed the difference between premeditated crime and desperate expedience. As Poirot assembled the fragments of truth scattered among the mirror's wreckage, he reflected on the symbolic appropriateness of the object's destruction, noting how its promise to reveal truth had indeed been fulfilled through the patient application of logical analysis to contradictions and inconsistencies that guilt inevitably creates in even the most carefully planned crimes. The mirror's shattering had eliminated physical evidence while providing psychological catharsis for a killer whose reflection had shown them their true nature, stripped of civilized veneer. The detective's methodical reconstruction of events now revealed a timeline that placed the perpetrator in position to commit both murders while establishing alibis that directed suspicion elsewhere. Their intimate knowledge of household routines and Lord Pemberton's habits providing perfect cover for orchestrating crimes that required sophisticated understanding of human psychology and criminal logistics. The use of matching silver implements as murder weapons had been both symbolic and practical, their connection to the mirror creating apparent supernatural significance while demonstrating the killer's detailed familiarity with Lord Pemberton's collection and their access to objects others would not have recognized as potential instruments of death. With the evidence assembled and the psychological patterns clear, Poirot prepared for the final gathering that would expose the truth hidden beneath Silvermere House's respectable exterior, knowing that justice, however long delayed, would emerge through the methodical application of reason to the complex web of vanity, greed, and desperation that had transformed scholarly fraud into calculated murder. The afternoon light cast long shadows across the library as Poirot arranged the assembled household in a precise semicircle facing the space where the great mirror had once stood, its absence somehow more commanding than its presence had ever been, the empty easel serving as a silent witness to the truth that would finally emerge through methodical revelation of human nature's darkest impulses. The Belgian detective positioned himself with characteristic precision, his egg-shaped head tilted thoughtfully as he surveyed the faces before him, each person carrying secrets that his investigation had gradually exposed through patient observation and psychological insight that penetrated facades of respectability to reveal the desperate calculations beneath. Inspector Morrison occupied a chair near the fireplace, his notebook ready to record confessions and evidence that would finally provide legal resolution to crimes that had seemed to mock conventional detection methods. While outside, the December snow continued to fall with relentless persistence that matched Poirot's own methodical approach to uncovering truth hidden beneath layers of deception and misdirection. The detective began with philosophical observations about mirrors and their symbolic significance throughout human history, noting how reflective surfaces had always been associated with revelation of inner truth, stripped of the protective disguises that social interaction demanded from those who carried guilt within their hearts. The mirror, mes amis, it promised to reveal truth, and indeed it has done so, though not through supernatural means, but through the patient application of logic to the contradictions that guilt inevitably creates. Poirot announced, his accented English lending gravity to words that seemed to address the empty easel as much as his living audience. He explained how the mirror's construction had been subtly modified, its silvered backing altered to create disturbing optical effects under specific lighting conditions, preying upon viewers' hidden anxieties and guilty consciences through psychological manipulation. rather than supernatural revelation. The detective's reconstruction began with Lord Pemberton's growing awareness that his prestigious collection had become the centerpiece of an international art forgery scheme. His discovery of the deception through correspondence with European dealers who had begun asking uncomfortable questions about authentication procedures and provenance documentation that revealed systematic fraud extending back 18 months. The victim's determination to restore his honor through confession and cooperation with authorities investigating art fraud across Europe had made his elimination essential to preserving a criminal enterprise that generated enormous profits through the replacement of genuine antiquities with masterful forgeries. The locked room mystery, it was achieved through methods both simple and sophisticated. Poirot continued, producing the sliver of pale blue sealing wax that had been concealed within the mirror's frame. A duplicate key, created through patient observation and wax impressions taken during routine household activities, provided access to Lord Pemberton's study after he had secured himself within. The detective's explanation revealed planning that extended far beyond desperate improvisation, demonstrating a mind capable of long-term calculation and sophisticated understanding of both human psychology and criminal logistics. Poirot then systematically examined each suspect's motives and opportunities, his green eyes moving across their faces as he spoke. Lady Pemberton's dependence on sleeping draughts provided her with an alibi, while her husband's threatened exposure of financial irregularities created powerful motive for preservation of her carefully constructed world. Miss Vivian's secret engagement and inheritance concerns made her desperate for freedom, yet her youth and emotional transparency eliminated her from consideration as the methodical planner these crimes required. Colonel Ashford's gambling debts and financial dependence on Lord Pemberton created obvious motive, but his straightforward military nature made the sophisticated deception impossible, while Dr. Fielding's medical knowledge and access to secrets were undermined by his preference for Virginia tobacco rather than the distinctive Turkish blend found at both crime scenes. The physical evidence proved equally illuminating, particularly the Turkish tobacco residue discovered in both the study's fireplace and among the mirror's wreckage, its distinctive aroma and exclusive provenance pointing inexorably towards someone whose habits had betrayed them despite careful planning. This evidence, combined with handwriting analysis of forged documents and the discovery of a club receipt bearing the establishment's name where such tobacco was purchased exclusively, created an unbreakable chain of proof that eliminated all suspects save one. "Mr. James Whitmore," Poirot announced quietly, his voice carrying the finality of absolute certainty. "Your position as secretary provided perfect cover for orchestrating crimes that required intimate knowledge of Lord Pemberton's habits, collection, and financial affairs." The pale man's composure cracked visibly as the detective continued his methodical exposition, revealing how Whitmore's access to correspondence, authentication procedures, and international contacts had made him invaluable to the forgery network, while his meticulous nature had enabled the creation of duplicate keys and the staging of locked room mysteries. The detective explained how Whitmore's careful manipulation of household finances had concealed the systematic replacement of genuine antiquities with forgeries, his £47 discrepancy serving as misdirection from far larger sums diverted through creative bookkeeping and delayed ledger entries. The secretary's intimate knowledge of Lord Pemberton's collection had enabled him to identify matching pieces like the silver letter opener, using symbolic murder weapons that created apparent supernatural significance while demonstrating his sophisticated understanding of psychological manipulation. The second murder revealed the first, Poirot observed, noting how Hartwell's elimination had been improvised rather than planned, the secretary's panic at discovering the psychological trap leading to violence that exposed his true nature and destroyed the careful facade he had maintained throughout the investigation. The contrast between Lord Pemberton's calculated killing and Hartwell's clumsy elimination revealed the difference between premeditated crime and desperate expedients, while physical evidence, including blue wool threads and nicotine stains, provided final confirmation of guilt that could no longer be concealed through misdirection and false alibis. The silence that followed Poirot's accusation stretched across the library like a physical presence, broken only by the soft crackling of the fire and James Whitmore's sharp intake of breath as his carefully constructed world finally collapsed beneath the weight of methodical detection. The pale secretary sat motionless in his chair, his ledger forgotten in his lap as his calculating eyes met Poirot's steady gaze with the recognition that further deception would prove futile against evidence assembled with scientific precision and psychological insight that penetrated every facade he had constructed over months of elaborate planning. "You are quite right, Monsieur Poirot," Whitmore said finally, his voice carrying the mechanical quality of a man reciting facts from one of his meticulously maintained ledgers. "Though I confess surprise at your methods. The mirror was merely a device, as you suspected, but an effective one for directing attention towards supernatural explanations rather than human calculation." His confession possessed the same methodical precision that had made him invaluable as Lord Pemberton's secretary, each detail revealed with the detached analysis of a man who had traded integrity for financial gain, only to discover that wealth acquired through betrayal could never provide genuine satisfaction. The secretary's explanation revealed the true scope of his criminal enterprise, far exceeding the simple authentication fraud that Inspector Morrison had initially suspected. Whitmore had orchestrated an international network that systematically replaced genuine antiquities with masterful forgeries, using Lord Pemberton's prestigious reputation as cover for transactions that generated enormous profits through discreet channels his bookkeeping skills had helped establish and maintain. The £47 discrepancy that had so troubled his conscience was deliberate misdirection, a trivial sum designed to distract from hundreds of thousands, siphoned through creative accounting and delayed ledger entries. Lord Pemberton's growing suspicions became impossible to manage. Whitmore continued, his pale features reflecting the firelight with ghostly intensity, as he described intercepting correspondence with European dealers who were asking uncomfortable questions about provenance documentation. His determination to restore his honor through confession would have destroyed everything we had accomplished, implicating innocent collectors who had unknowingly purchased fraudulent pieces and exposing a network that benefited everyone involved through practical arrangements rather than abstract principles. Poirot's methodical reconstruction revealed how the locked room murder had been executed with the same attention to detail that characterized Whitmore's bookkeeping, every element planned to create an impossible scenario while providing an unshakable alibi. The duplicate key, created through patient observation and wax impressions taken during routine household activities, had provided access to Lord Pemberton's study after the household retired, while the matching silver letter opener served both symbolic and practical purposes in creating apparent supernatural connections that would misdirect investigation. The Turkish tobacco residue discovered in both crime scenes represented the single flaw in otherwise perfect planning. Whitmore's nervous smoking habit revealing itself through traces that careful cleaning could not entirely eliminate. His patronage of an exclusive London club where such exotic blends were purchased exclusively had provided Poirot with the crucial link between the secretary's refined tastes and the physical evidence that conventional investigation had overlooked through lack of psychological insight into human behavior under pressure. Hartwell's death was indeed improvised, Whitmore admitted, his composure showing subtle cracks that revealed the emotional cost of maintaining such elaborate deceptions over extended periods. The antiquarian's arrival during your psychological trap created immediate danger of exposure that demanded violent response. Despite the risks such action entailed, his scholarly integrity made him a threat that could not be managed through bribery or intimidation, but only through permanent elimination. The mirror's destruction had been accidental but symbolically appropriate, representing the end of illusions and the beginning of justice's patient emergence from lies that had concealed it for too long. The object's promise to reveal truth had indeed been fulfilled through methodical investigation rather than supernatural revelation, its shattering marking the moment when Whitmore's careful calculations gave way to desperate improvisation that exposed his true nature. As Inspector Morrison prepared the arrest warrant with obvious relief at finally having concrete evidence and a confession that would satisfy both legal requirements and public curiosity, the household's reaction reflected complex emotions, ranging from relief at having suspicion removed to horror at discovering how completely they had been deceived by someone whose quiet efficiency had made him nearly invisible despite his constant presence in their daily lives. Lady Pemberton's aristocratic composure finally showed genuine emotion as she realized how her husband's death had been orchestrated by someone she had trusted with intimate family matters, while Miss Vivian's youth made concealment of her shock impossible as she understood that her inheritance had been secured through calculated murder rather than natural causes. Colonel Ashford's military bearing provided stability as he assisted Morrison in securing the prisoner, though his obvious agitation revealed that even battlefield experience had not prepared him for psychological warfare conducted within supposedly civilized walls. The handcuffs clicked shut with harsh finality as Whitmore submitted his wrists with bleak politeness, his calculating mind already assessing the futility of further struggle. As the authorities prepared to remove him from Silvermere House, Poirot observed the proceedings with philosophical detachment, knowing that justice, however long delayed, had finally emerged through patient application of psychological insight to human nature's darkest impulses. The mirror promised to show truth, Poirot reflected quietly, adjusting an imaginary speck of dust from his sleeve. And indeed it has done so, though not through supernatural means, but through the methodical application of reason to contradictions that guilt inevitably creates in even the most carefully planned crimes. The police motor disappeared into the December snow with James Whitmore seated rigidly between two constables, his pale features maintaining the mechanical precision that had characterized both his bookkeeping and his carefully orchestrated murders. Inspector Morrison followed in satisfaction, privately acknowledging that without Poirot's psychological insights, these crimes would have remained forever among the growing collection of impossible mysteries that plagued rural investigations, though the commendations that would surely follow provided welcome compensation for his earlier confusion. Silvermere House settled into the peculiar quiet that follows violent revelation, each resident processing the knowledge that their trusted secretary had systematically betrayed the family, whose secrets he had been employed to protect. The international implications of Whitmore's confession rippled outward as authorities across Europe moved to dismantle the sophisticated forgery network, arresting dealers and collectors who had unknowingly participated in criminal enterprises, disguised as legitimate scholarly authentication, while the art market itself would bear permanent scars from this elaborate deception. Lady Pemberton retreated to her private sitting room with aristocratic dignity, her training providing strength to face social consequences that threatened everything she had spent decades constructing through careful management of reputation and position. The revelation of her husband's final attempt to expose the fraud transformed his death from personal tragedy into posthumous vindication, though the complex emotions of grief mixed with relief would require years to resolve through patient acceptance of circumstances beyond her control. Miss Vivian confronted the uncomfortable knowledge that her inheritance had been secured through calculated violence, her stepfather's murder having eliminated the obstacle to her marriage with Thomas Hartley while simultaneously revealing the brutal reality of how freedom could be purchased with blood. The young woman's natural empathy struggled with happiness built upon such foundations, creating psychological burdens that only time and genuine love could hope to heal through gradual acceptance of life's moral complexities. Colonel Ashford prepared for departure with military efficiency, his financial difficulties now requiring immediate attention without Lord Pemberton's assistance to provide temporary relief from increasingly impatient creditors. His straightforward nature found comfort in having the mystery resolved through conventional detection rather than supernatural intervention. Though his experience with battlefield violence had not prepared him for the psychological intricacies of domestic murder orchestrated by someone whose quiet competence had made him nearly invisible among the household's daily routines. Dr. Fielding remained to attend the family's medical needs during their difficult transition from crime scene to normal residence, his professional discretion providing valuable support while his own involvement in the investigation had revealed uncomfortable truths about complex relationships that could develop between physicians and patients when treatment extended over long periods. His careful attention to Lady Pemberton's dependence on sleeping draughts would require delicate management to prevent additional scandal from compounding the tragedy that had already devastated their carefully constructed world. Mrs. Blackwood moved through her duties with the mechanical precision of shock, her 30 years of faithful service having prepared her for many domestic crises, but not for discovering that her master's trusted secretary had systematically betrayed the family whose secrets she had guarded with such devoted discretion. The housekeeper's keen observational skills, which had proved invaluable to the investigation, now served to detect subtle changes in household dynamics that would require careful management to preserve whatever stability remained after violence had shattered their respectable facade. As evening approached, Poirot found himself alone in the library where the great mirror had once commanded attention, its absence somehow more significant than its presence had ever been. The empty easels serving as monument to vanity and deception that had ultimately destroyed both Lord Pemberton and his murderer through justice's patient application to crimes that had seemed impossible to solve. The detective's methodical mind reviewed the case's resolution with professional satisfaction, noting how each piece of evidence had fallen into place once psychological insight revealed the patterns that guilt invariably creates in even the most carefully planned criminal enterprises. The mirror's destruction had been symbolically appropriate, representing the end of illusions and the beginning of truth's emergence through methodical investigation rather than supernatural revelation. Its promise to reveal inner nature having been fulfilled through careful analysis of human behavior under pressure rather than mystical insight into souls stripped of protective disguises. The burned remnants in the fireplace told their own story of desperate attempts to destroy evidence that patient detection had ultimately recovered, while scattered fragments reflected the shattered deceptions that had provided cover for international fraud conducted under scholarly respectability. "Veritas in speculo," Poirot murmured, adjusting his cravat as he prepared for departure from Silvermere House. Truth in the mirror, indeed. The glass itself reveals nothing, mes amis, but human nature, when observed with sufficient patience and understanding, cannot long conceal its essential character. Monsieur Whitmore, he believed his methodical mind could impose order upon chaos, but guilt, it creates its own contradictions that no amount of careful planning can entirely eliminate. The detective's green eyes reflected the firelight as he contemplated how justice, however carefully concealed by elaborate deception, would always emerge through the patient application of reason to the fundamental patterns of human behavior that remained constant despite the sophisticated masks that civilization provided for concealing primitive impulses toward greed and violence. The December morning brought crystalline clarity to Silvermere House as Poirot prepared for his departure, the snow-covered landscape reflecting the pristine resolution that his methodical investigation had finally achieved through patient application of psychological insight to crimes that had seemed impossible to solve through conventional detection methods. Inspector Morrison stood ready with the final paperwork that would coordinate international efforts to dismantle Whitmore's sophisticated forgery network, his professional gratitude genuine despite lingering bewilderment at methods that succeeded where traditional police work had failed to penetrate alibis, constructed with mathematical precision and supported by physical evidence designed to eliminate every possible suspect through systematic misdirection. The household gathered in the entrance hall with the subdued courtesy of people forever chained by violent revelation, each processing the knowledge that their trusted secretary had systematically betrayed the family whose secrets he had been employed to protect, while orchestrating criminal enterprises that exploited Lord Pemberton's prestigious reputation for fraudulent purposes extending across European art markets. Lady Pemberton maintained her aristocratic composure with dignity that would serve her well in facing social consequences, her husband's final attempt to expose the fraud having transformed his death from personal tragedy into posthumous vindication as authorities moved to prosecute dealers and collectors who had unknowingly participated in systematic replacement of genuine antiquities with masterful forgeries. Miss Vivian confronted the complex emotions of inheritance secured through tragic circumstances, her stepfather's murder having eliminated opposition to her marriage with Thomas Hartley, while revealing the brutal reality of how freedom could be purchased with blood, creating psychological burdens that only time and genuine love could hope to heal through gradual acceptance of life's moral complexities. Colonel Ashford prepared for departure with military efficiency, his financial difficulties now requiring immediate attention without Lord Pemberton's assistance, though his straightforward nature found comfort in having the mystery resolved through logical analysis rather than supernatural intervention that his practical mind had instinctively rejected. Dr. Fielding remained to attend the family's medical needs during their difficult transition, his professional discretion providing valuable support, while his own involvement had revealed uncomfortable truths about complex relationships that could develop between physicians and patients when treatment extended over long periods and involved conditions requiring intimate knowledge of personal habits and private fears. Mrs. Blackwood moved through her duties with mechanical precision, 30 years of faithful service having prepared her for many domestic crises, but not for discovering that her master's trusted secretary had exploited his position to orchestrate international fraud, requiring murder to preserve criminal enterprises, disguised as scholarly authentication. As Poirot stood for the final time in the library, where the great mirror had once commanded attention, its absence somehow more significant than its presence had ever been, he reflected on the case's essential lesson about truth and deception, noting how the object's promise of revelation had indeed been fulfilled through methodical investigation rather than supernatural intervention, its destruction serving as symbolic conclusion to elaborate facades that had concealed systematic criminal activity beneath respectable scholarly expertise. The mirror's Latin motto, Veritas in speculo, had proven prophetic not through mystical powers, but through patient observation of human nature that could not indefinitely suppress fundamental patterns guilt invariably created in even the most calculating criminal minds. The psychology, mes amis, Poirot observed to Inspector Morrison as they prepared to leave. That remains the key to understanding crimes that seem impossible to conventional detection. Monsieur Whitmore, he believed his methodical nature could impose perfect order upon chaos, but human behavior, it creates its own contradictions that no amount of careful planning can entirely eliminate. The detective's green eyes reflected satisfaction at having penetrated deception sophisticated enough to fool European authorities through systematic exploitation of aristocratic connections and scholarly reputation. His success depending upon psychological insight rather than physical evidence that could be manipulated by sufficiently clever criminals. The train journey to London provided opportunity for philosophical reflection on crimes that had demonstrated how modern criminal enterprises could operate across national boundaries through sophisticated understanding of both human psychology and legal limitations that conventional methods struggled to penetrate without patient application of insight into behavioral patterns remaining consistent despite elaborate attempts at concealment. Whitmore's Turkish tobacco preference, distinctive handwriting on forged documents, and unconscious behavioral patterns under stress had provided crucial evidence that traditional investigation had overlooked through lack of understanding regarding fundamental aspects of human nature that guilt could not entirely suppress through conscious control. Standing on Victoria Station's platform as porters bustled with characteristic London efficiency, Poirot adjusted his overcoat against winter chill and considered the broader implications of an investigation that had tested his methods against crimes planned with exceptional sophistication and executed with mechanical precision, initially seeming to eliminate every possible suspect through methodical creation of unshakable alibis. His success had demonstrated once again that justice, however cleverly concealed by elaborate deception, would ultimately emerge through patient application of reason to eternal patterns of human behavior that no amount of sophisticated planning could entirely suppress, while vanity and greed continued providing fundamental motives, transforming respectable citizens into calculating murderers whose crimes demanded the most discerning investigation to reveal truth hidden beneath layers of careful misdirection and false respectability, proving that the little gray cells, when properly applied with methodical precision and psychological understanding, could penetrate any mystery that human nature created through its endless capacity for both brilliance and moral corruption.